G'day everybody, and welcome back to the Risky Rollers podcast. I'm Dalton, and I'm joined by Jake.
How you doing, guys?
And from all the way from the UK, definitely not in a complicated time zone that we didn't mess up this morning before recording, it's Matt.
Hello, hi, nice to meet you all.
G'day Matt, it's fantastic to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, super excited.
Fantastic. So we're going to be chatting with Matt today because he does a fair bit of writing, writes a lot of 40k stories and other things like that, which is a really cool part of the hobby that doesn't get enough spotlight shone on it. So we're going to be chatting with him about some of the things involved with that. Before we get into that, I'll mention massive thanks to Dice Arcade for being the official sponsor of the channel. You'll hear more about that a bit later. Thanks to Galen over at the Tray Tinker. If any of you want custom bespoke dice trays, check out the link down in the description. Big thanks to everyone who supports us on Patreon. Really does help us out. So get amongst it there if you want to help us out there. And then if you just want to hang out with us, talk 40k in all its aspects, jump into the Discord. It's a great place. We've got loads of people down there talking about all sorts of bits of 40k, 30k, and everything else related to it. We organise club days through there. They get first run at our events. Speaking of events, we're running a doubles tournament next month in May. If there are any spots still available as sort of when this podcast comes out, jump in on that. Get your team together and come on down to Moorabbin and get involved.
Harry and I will be representing the Imperium. I just teamed up with Harry the other day, so...
Nice.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. We've got some spicy teams.
Actually, so I can borrow the Grey Knights, right?
Absolutely not.
Sad.
We're gonna torpedo that straight away.
Yeah, okay. Alright.
So, yeah, Icon will be there with Harry. He'll be running Grey Knights. And yeah, we've got some real spicy teams already starting to line up for that one. So that should be good.
Alright, without any further ado, welcome Matt. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. Everything's right there.
Now, you mentioned...
Sorry? What were you saying, Dalton?
I was saying, Matt, you mentioned a couple of ones that for us to mention as well. If any of the people listening to it are wanting to get involved with writing or reading some of this stuff that you're working on, to check out the Inquisitors Archives on Facebook.
Yeah.
And Port Invicta on Weebly.com if that's something that you use.
And then how I found Matt initially, his stuff is on the fanfiction.net app/website. Much easier to read.
Yeah.
Dalton and I had this conversation about this last night. The only reason I won't read things written on the archives is because they're download on PDFs and I can't read them in dark mode. I read them instead on fanfiction.net. How did this all start, Matt? Like, what got you into writing? Is this something that you've always done since you were a kid?
Well,
writing stories in high school?
First, I remember my first encounter with the Dark Millennium was the book First and Only by Dan Abnett and his Gaunt's Ghost series. I was absolutely hooked. And I spent pretty much the next decade reading everything I could get my hands on in the genre. And when I was about 20, I decided to maybe start seeing if I could put something together myself. I didn't get very far. I put out a few bits and bobs here and there. But then about 2014, 2015, self-publishing was becoming very popular. And that's what really sparked me into thinking, I can do this. And I just set out to do just a few short stories, no more than 10,000 words. And somehow it's become this massive epic arc that's been going on for years now.
And is that the Arc of Storm Heralds?
Yes, the Storm Heralds, my Space Marine chapter in 40k. They were the first chapter I came to build. And I began very conventionally. They were very much a codex chapter, as they call it. But as I developed more skills, as it were, I felt I could stray further from the mould, so I began to develop more personalities and more adventures. What I want to do with the Storm Heralds
Yeah.
was to do for Space Marines what Dan Abnett had done for the Imperial Guard. So I began with the premise that they're a complete bunch of nobodies that nobody's ever heard of. And that's their starting point.
Yeah.
And rather than make it a problem in the stories, I made it a feature saying, why does the Imperium not know who these guys are? So they're a backwater. They're defending the middle of nowhere, and they're basically the bunch of guys who the rest of the Space Marines just go like, oh, just get these guys someplace where we don't have to deal with them. And that was the origin of where I began with them.
Yeah, like they've just received this dead area of space as their I can't think of the word, grounds to protect, so to speak, and everyone's like, well, you just look after that and we'll look after the important things.
Yeah. There's a protectorate. One of the ideas I was toying with at the time was that they had a religious bent. So at the start of the story, they're just sitting on the middle of a pilgrim trail, just basically protecting shipping moving back and forth. But as they're adventurous and darker, I made it more important by claiming that warp storms have isolated every other single passage between Segmentum Solar and Tempestus. So now the Storm Heralds find themselves sitting in the middle of the only strategic pass to pretty much the entire south half of the galaxy. So they've gone from being nobodies to be rather important.
Yeah, right. I've got...
That's pretty cool.
It's... Yeah. Yeah, it is super cool.
When I looked at it, the Battle of the Atlantic in World War II. It's not a very famous battle, but it was essential.
That's really interesting. There's a lot of real world things drawn across into a lot of 40k in general, and it's always good to see when that sort of I guess grounding in a real event can inspire and you can bring elements from that across to a story.
Well, it's funny that you say that. Like, I don't even know what the Battle of Atlantic is, but to someone who's like knows history, that's really cool. It's good drawing from real world, because sometimes you look at real world stories and it's 10 times more crazier than any fiction you read. I think that's super cool. So what's the end goal here? Like, when it comes to your writing, are you just sort of happy to continue doing what you're doing? Like, and don't get me wrong, I love it, but like, is the goal to be an author, or is this just the same way that I like to paint my minis, but I'm not trying to win a golden demon, or are you wanting to go all the way with it one day?
I've had a few nibbles on commissions doing writing for non-40k projects. I suppose the end dream goal would be for Games Workshop to publish something that I've written, but they're very, very selective about who they take. So I'm happy for the work to stand, and if people enjoy them, then I'm quite content with that.
Yeah, I certainly enjoy them, but it's cool that end goal. You were featured on Cold Open Stories.
This is where Jake introduced me to you. Cool. He sent me the link to the Cold Open Stories when that went up and said, "Here, look at this." So it was a pretty cool little short story about a ship raising the alarm about a chaos invasion. Had some really interesting work on the characters and the crew in the ship that demonstrated a really good level of characterization.
That was
the thing about that though.
No, I was just going to say that was an extract from a larger story that I'd written. It was, I thought, the most emotionally part.
Yeah, that's what I. Yeah, that was what I was going to say as well. Is that is a part from a much larger story, and that story's awesome. That's one of the ones that I have read, and the whole chaos incursion in that becomes really, really epic, and it's well worth a read. So tell us more about your your chapters. You've mentioned the Storm Heralds, and you've got a couple more that I know of, and there's one that you've written about recently, I believe, or relatively recently, that I've been hoping that you would get round to for a while. But yeah, apart from the Amber Vipers, apart from the Storm Heralds, who else have you got going on?
Well, as I said earlier, the Storm Heralds were my first creation, and they're the most conventional Codex chapter. After I'd done a few of those stories, I went on to create another chapter called the Amber Vipers, and my goal with them was to make them as different as I possibly could. So these guys are basically start from a position of being renegades trying to rebuild. I picked a chapter I actually really like called the Soul Drinkers, and said the premise was a few of those guys got away.
I've read that whole series there. It's really cool to draw some of that across.
I could have picked anyone. It was just a nice nod to the books. My idea was a few of them actually got away and decided that they couldn't survive as Soul Drinkers, so they changed their name and they set out to basically build a whole new chapter from nothing. And they have no support, no recognition, no allies. So they basically reduced the premise of being Space Marine mercenaries, fighting for whoever will resupply them.
Yeah.
And a good friend of mine.
Yeah, it's actually, I have read almost all of this, and it's a massive compilation of just epic tales, and you get to watch this chapter grow from the renegades and to going on to getting their own what's the ship called, the Serpent's Rex. What sort of ship is that?
Starfort. It's a very small phalanx that the Imperial Fists have. But the important thing about Serpent Rex,
but
that's a really cool little turnaround for them.
They struggle tooth and claw to get it.
But the important thing about the base is that it's a ruin. It is
they
absolutely wrecked.
So
they didn't just suddenly lock into a massively powerful base. They're going to have to scrape and borrow and steal to get this thing even remotely working for them, even though they've had a big step forward.
And then there's it's very, very hard. Their struggle is very real but very cool. It's like these guys fight so hard to do good, and the world's just kicking them in the ass every step of the way. It's a very different perspective for Space Marines, something that I've never sort of seen anywhere else, and it's really cool to know that. Oh, really cool the way it plays out, that these guys still want to be, Space Marines. They still want to uphold the honor of the Emperor, but they just have no choice but to be the dirtiest, dodgiest Space Marines you've ever met. And it's a really awesome take.
Yeah.
If you're someone who doesn't sort of enjoy the general typical archetype of Space Marines, this book is up your alley, because it's not like Space Marines you've ever seen before.
Well, the way I look at it is they want to be salamanders, but in practice they're Marines malevolent. So they're sort of stuck between these two extremes.
And
that's pretty cool, yeah.
And the third one that I touched on, I believe you've created content for the Smoke Jaguars, like official by you. There is a book for the Smoke Jaguars now.
Yes, there is. The Smoke Jaguar I had before the Amber Vipers, actually, but I really struggled to get a handle on. They were meant to be a Raven Guard successor.
Yeah.
Who were very mystical and very obscure. And I just struggled to find an angle on that.
Yeah.
Until the day hit me. Maybe they weren't all Raven Guard. Maybe half of them were Knights Lords of Raven Guard. And they're caught between the two extremes. And that just absolutely took off for me. So I've done an origin story of how a bunch of Night Lords and a bunch of Raven Guard, who absolutely hate each other, have to figure out how to work together against a much bigger threat. And this was just after the Great Crusade.
because they get trapped on a planet, right? I haven't read the story for the smoke jaguars yet, but it's high on my priority list. But I have read the Codex Astartes that you wrote for it, and they get trapped on a planet, right?
That was my first attempt at them. Yeah, so a few ideas got tweaked later, but the premise was now these two groups are stuck together on a planet cut off by warp storms for several thousand years. So by the time they emerge back into the Imperium, they become something very strange by Space Marine standards. Where else it is, they're not soldiers, they're hunters. They don't think about battle lines, they don't think about strategic objectives, they think about hunting the enemy leader. That's their mission. They're assassins, they're scouts, they're infiltrators. They don't care about if this city falls or that city falls. It's all about getting the enemy's head for them.
And they're based loosely on Central American influence?
I've tried to give a few nods in that direction, yes. My knowledge of Mayan culture is minimal, so it's very much a nod, but I like to think they'll grow into their own thing as I develop them further. At the current time, I've only done the origin story, so I'm interested to see where they'll go in the future.
I think the nod is definitely strong enough to to give you that vibe, like the obsidian daggers that they're all presented with, and just the way that they're librarians, they're shade seers, is it?
Yes. I was trying to create very unique.
Yeah, they're shade seers. It is a very unique feeling. The way they interact is almost, the way they read is almost like a Night Lord if a Night Lord wasn't psychotic.
That's
like still that. Yeah, that's the way it reads to me. And like I said, I haven't gone into the full story. I've just gone into. I've obviously just had their interactions with them when they hunt the lictor. That I think is a awesome piece of writing where you touch on them hunting a lictor on that hive world.
Yes.
And writing from the perspective of a lictor, or writing from the perspective of a Tyranid in general, is not something you see very often. And having the two of them trying to outwit each other as apex hunters was really, really cool.
Yes, at first the Smoke Jaguars were just supporting characters in the Storm Herald series, but when I'm going to be trying to move forward with their own stories, I'll be trying to press that angle and get into their very unique worldview.
Well, they were good supporting characters. Whenever they jumped into one of your stories, I was like, "Ooh, I like these guys. They're really, really cool. They're really, really different." And they're even their interactions with other chapters, just because they are so different, always made for good interactions.
Now, all these three chapters.
Of all these.
So these three
no, you go. Of all
I've
these three
made,
chapters you've made,
they may sound wildly divergent, but there is a common theme throughout all my chapters, and I find is essential for story.
Okay.
Is there is an internal tension in the chapter. So, like I said, the Smoke Jaguars are half Night Lord, half Raven Guard. So they are torn between the two halves of their blood, vengeance and justice. Amber Vipers, the tension is between honour and survival, what they want to be and what they are. And going back to my original Storm Heralds, they had a conflict in their ranks between Emperor worshippers and the people who held to the Codex and said the Emperor isn't a god. And one of the stories fought over the matter. There's always an internal tension.
Yeah. So, is that a nod to the fact that there was an Amber Vipers chapter? Like, if you jump on, oh no, that's Storm Heralds. Forget that. Scratch that question. And the internal conflict of the Storm Heralds.
Yes, that was I said between Emperor worshippers and non-Emperor Emperor worshippers, and it was trying to decide
okay, yeah.
which philosophy they would follow as a chapter. Of course, the Civil War occurred just as Roberto Groneman was waking up, so it was incredibly bad timing on behalf of the Emperor worshippers, because there's one thing that's absolutely going to hack off Roberto Groneman is Space Marines worshipping the Emperor.
And of all these chapters that you've created, do you have a favourite?
Oh, well, it's difficult to say. Obviously, the Storm Heralds was my first, so I've learnt a lot of them, writing them. So you really see progress. The Amber Vipers have become a very strong contender, and everyone seems to resonate very much with them. I definitely look forward to returning to them once I've finished my current work. The Smoke Jaguars, I think, are the hardest to write for. Because they're so exotic, it's hard to find the right angle on them. But I've got a lot of interesting ideas where they could go in the future.
Yeah, I'm keen for that for sure. Well, I mean, even for me, it's hard to say that I have a favourite. The Storm Heralds would probably be my favourite, probably only because Novak is my personal favourite character of yours that you've written. I find him very entertaining. I like his attitude. I like his skill set. I liked that. I can't remember the name of the book. I always struggle with remembering the names of the Storm Herald books. But the one where Novak is selected as the champion in the tournament, and he has to fight the Red Hunter who betrays him. Yeah, I think that book gave me a really good insight into Novak's character and who he was, and he's definitely my favourite. So by that, the Storm Heralds would probably be my favourite.
Well, they've certainly been running the longest.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty cool. I'm definitely keen to read about
over the three archetype. Which ones introduced you the most, Dalton? If you were to
I'm a massive Soul Drinkers fan, so the Amber Vipers definitely speak to me on that level. That's something I'll definitely be looking into and having a read through, because that sounds really cool.
I think as well, the Amber Vipers, just the diversity of the things they get into is crazy. They have interactions with a Necron. What's it called? Dyson Sphere.
Yes.
Where they basically end up in an empty pocket of space with a. How to describe a Dyson Sphere?
That's basically a sphere around a star that's collecting all the energy.
Yeah. And they have interactions with Tau and Necrons, and I can't even remember, but they're just their interactions are wild. The things they get up to, and I think you'd really like the Necron ones.
Yeah.
Also, because you love Necrons as well.
The Necrons were an interesting story because they are immortal and effectively unkillable. They don't have any physical loss, and they have no souls to lose. But the objective was the Necrons have one thing left to lose, and it's their minds. The one thing the Necron fears is losing his mind.
Yeah. That's pretty cool, and it's a good bit of insight there, because you're right. They can be very, very inaccessible characters to look at.
It makes it. I guess I never even thought about it now until you said it. But it would be hard to write interactions when one half of the interactions just genuinely got nothing to say. You're like, "Ma, I'm mad," and then Necron's like, "Beep boop," like, "I don't care. I'm just gonna shoot you."
One of my tricks to get around that was to say, anger is an emotion, but hatred is a choice. So a robot can't feel angry, but a robot can hate.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and that can be
this
tied
is
right up
reflective
with how they're interacting and how their characters think about things, and that can
and that's reflective also even in the lore that we have of like is it destroyer cults that just hatred everything.
The rule hatred everything.
Yeah, hatred everything. That ties in well.
I think the rule at the moment is currently called. I think it's called Hardwired for Destruction. But they're very, very quickly, because it's a joke I make all the time when I'm playing Necrons. The old universal special rule in 5th, 6th, and 7th edition was called Hatred, and it just let you re-roll attacks or something like that. And it would have Hatred and then in brackets like a target. So Black Templars would have Hatred Orcs. Grey Knights would have Hatred Demons. Macragge veterans, Tyrannic War veterans would have Hatred Tyranids, and it just made them slightly better against the target. And all Destroyer Cult units had Hatred everything. Sorry, just very quickly, I feel like I should clarify that it's not currently the rule, but it's a joke based on the old rule because it was an incredible name for it.
See, I've only ever heard it when I'm playing as you, so I always just assumed the rule was called Hatred Everything.
Well, I can't remember all these newfangled rules back in my day when it was there.
It's certainly getting like that now. Those new codexes are hefty.
But well, look, we'll take a quick break. We'll hear a little bit from Tim from Dice Arcade, and we'll be right back.
dicearcade.com.au. All the biggest brands of miniatures and wargaming. Free postage over $250.
All right, thanks for that one, Tim. So before that, we were talking a little bit about Necrons and writing them. What are some of the challenges that you look at when you're getting to grips with writing these characters? Do you find it's easier or more difficult to write within bounds of like established characters or established archetypes, or forge your own that sort of fit next to them?
Well, I find a good place to start is to look at a codex. And you often find a character like, say, a captain, but then there's all kinds of variations on armour and styles and powers under that. And it's very helpful to look at those, to start to conflate them into personalities. You can tell a lot about a character by the kind of weapon they wield. A character with a long sword will behave very differently to a character with an axe, or a character with 2 small daggers, or a character with a big gun. You can learn a lot about personality by looking at the model.
Yeah. I mean, to a lesser extent, that's something I definitely notice when modeling. I do a lot of like small conversions and kit bashes and things, and seeing a character develop out of the plastic when you're actually physically putting something together.
My original,
and I suppose you can take that even further.
My original Stormhell squad began as an idea when I was putting together a group of models, and by chance one of them was put together quite sloppily and ended up taller than the rest. And from him, I looked at that character and I saw a character who was not tall just physically, but morally superior, fatherly figure to give advice to characters. And he became my character, Furion, who went on to become a chaplain in his time. And then looking around the rest of the models, there was a standard bearer, and he became the young, innocent character. And the character with the swords became Novak, the champion. The character with an axe and a very long backpack antenna, which you used to get on models, became the cheeky communication specialist, who always got in trouble because he couldn't keep his nose out of communication ciphers. And his personalities just grew and grew as I went on.
Yeah.
So hang on. You're telling me there's models for the Storm Heralds? I need to see this. Can you, when you get a minute, post them in one of the channels on the Discord? Because I these are characters that I've read a whole lot about, and I did not know there was models for them. I need to see that.
I'll see if I can find the models. Yes.
That would be super awesome.
They're quite old now, but I can give you the pictures. Yes.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So that touches on the probably the nearest I ever get to like writing extra stuff for it, aside from writing like small bits of narrative for campaigns and things, would be when I'm writing little bits of headcanon about and little bits of fluff about my own armies and things like that. So I guess I wanted to ask, like, do you think it's a good place for people who are enjoying the game and enjoying the narrative to get started and to get a bit of a taste for writing things about it? Like, is it worthwhile to be looking at it and trying to expand upon your own armies and your own lore from there, or is writing that kind of thing and to the level that you do it something else entirely, where you sort of come from somewhere different?
I think it's an excellent place to start. I can't imagine you're putting an army together and not thinking to yourself, who's this guy and what's special about this model? And when you're playing the game, it's so much more significant if a guy you've named gets shot than just some random model in a squad. You think, oh my god, Furion's been shot. Oh no! It's really adds an element to the game.
Yeah.
As a good place to start writing, it's an excellent idea.
Yeah, well, I mean, from my point of view, so I sort of got back into 40k. It's been a while now, but it was 2020 sometime. It was about 2020 sometime, and I actually got back in because I was bored. We were in lockdown, and I downloaded the fanfiction app, and I started reading fanfiction from like just all sorts of games and whatever, and then I sort of I was like, geez, I haven't read anything 40k in a long time, and I jumped on there, and that was how I found Matt. And before I even started modeling or painting or playing games or anything, I was reading this stuff, and I was, inspired to try and do my own sort of stuff, and I was trying to write stuff based on the chaos Traitor Legion chapter, Renegade Warband. Warband is the word I was looking for. We got there in the end. The warband that I painted when I was a kid, and they were called the Blood Legion. And yeah, I also think it's an awesome place to start, even if you can't write. Like it, for the time I was invested in it, it was a lot of fun. And I even reached out to Matt initially and got some tips and tricks, and on character building and world building and stuff like that. And it's a hobby in itself, but it's certainly a really cool part that ties into 40k that I wish there was more of, I guess. More people had the guts to sort of stand up and go, well, I'm gonna write this and publicly post it, because I think it's equally as cool as people's paintings, painting models that they create.
Well, if anything, I've always enjoyed the books more than the actual game. So for me, it's always been far more a narrative story. There's been a lot of people arguing about the latest releases from Games Workshop and Climb List, but I'm actually happy to put motion again in the narrative. Because we got stuck on the 999 Millennium 41 for about a decade. We were stuck. So actually seeing the story move forward again is a big plus for me.
It opens up a lot of avenues and opportunities for storytelling and for little inroads for your own lore to sort of sit with it.
Well, this is a big question. This is something that we have talked about a lot in the Discord. Who needs to die in 40k?
Logan Grimnar.
Who do you think needs to die? So I think Dante needs to die. I think Huron Blackheart needs to go to Imperium Nihilus and kill Dante.
That would certainly cause.
That's what I would.
Immediately proving himself more effective than Abaddon has ever been.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. So who do you think needs to die?
I think what we need is change. I think some of the special characters need to go. But I would say probably the first one they should remove is Logan Grimnar, and then they can promote Ragnar Blackmane to run the Space Wolves. And I think that would move the Space Wolves narrative
That's
to a
pretty
whole new day of storytelling.
I mean, I'm always on board for killing the fairies, but the narratively speaking, moving Ragnar into there would be quite interesting because he's got a very different style of leadership to Logan Grimnar. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I mean, and then so speculation on the flip side. As someone who's heavily invested in narrative, do you think we'll see the return of more Primarchs, and who?
I think there will be more Primarchs coming in the near future. I don't know what game, but my personal is that it has to be the Lion, for a very simple reason. Roberto Guilliman and the Lion will not get on. I think the two of them will be completely at odds, and Guilliman will insist he obeys his codex, and the Lion will say, "Screw you." Now, any rational being
that tension's really important.
Any rational beings would say, like, Guilliman goes off to be administrator on Terra, and the Lion takes over as War Master. But this is 40k, so that's not going to happen.
Yeah. No. Well, I mean, from a tabletop player's standpoint, we sort of suspect that this year we're going to get Angron, because I'm pretty sure we're going to get World Eaters.
Yeah, they're not in the next Chaos Space Marine book. They'll be pushed out into their own codex, the same way that Death Guard and Thousand Sons have.
And with Death Guard and Thousand Sons, we got Magnus and Mortarion, so it would just be rubbish if we didn't get Angron. So for the traders, I suspect we're getting Angron, and I don't know. I think for the Imperial side, I think the general speculation is either the Lion or Russ. I would definitely prefer the Lion because we've got enough furries as it is. Thank you very much. But I guess Russ would be cool.
I think he'd be a good tabletop character. I'm not sure what he'd bring to the narrative of the story. They covered this in the white.
A big old hairy boy.
Yeah, no.
Russ wasn't the first Primarch to come back, and they basically said if Russ came back, all he'd do is just start killing things until he ran into something too tough, and that would be the end of him. Yeah. I mean, personally, I play Black Templar. Personally, I would like to see Dawn, but that's not going to happen. But if they do ever bring back Rogal Dawn, I sincerely hope they give a nod to the Emperor's Speech Device miniseries and bring him back in Centurion armor with a beautiful mustache.
Amazing. That's hilarious. I enjoy that. So, obviously, we're delved into 40k's, world building now, but how do you go about world building? Like, where do you start when you're writing a story, and you go, okay, they're on, a Dyson sphere, or they're on this planet. Like, what are the first things to tick off that make you say, okay, this is where I'm starting, and this is enough content to give the reader perspective of where they are within the galaxy?
Well, sometimes you just start off with an idea, like, as you said, the Dyson sphere is going here, and you start thinking about the implications of that. I think the next step is you have to start thinking about the people who live in your Dyson sphere, or your ice planet, or your water planet. You have to start thinking about their perspective, and questions arise, such as, or any world building, you have to ask yourself questions like, who is in government and who isn't, who grows the food, how does it get to where it needs to go. Those are the logistical questions which help build a world. But I think what makes a world stand out is trying to get into the heads of the people who live there. One of my favourite planets was basically Earth in the 1950s. It was a planet that looked like Earth in the 1950s. And this culture defined themselves by their enemies. So they were referring to themselves constantly as saying, well, we're like this, but at least we're not like the damn Reds. Or saying, if we look weak, then the Reds will do this. And
Right.
that was their culture. Everything they did as a cultural lens was perceived by what their enemies would be doing in response. And it created this very paranoid, inward-looking culture that refused to accept the possibility of outsiders, because in their world, everything was about this enemy culture.
Okay. Well, that's all really, like, I mean, when you say it, it sounds so straightforward, and but if you asked me to world build like that, I just couldn't. But as soon as you sort of describe it, it's so straightforward. Like, where does the food come from? It's just I don't know, it's clever. I enjoy it. And what about characters? I actually know sort of like how you go about character building, because like I mentioned earlier, I was attempting to write a couple years back, and you sent me you sort of have a standard template almost of how you go about writing characters, and like a set series of questions that you ask, like how would this character interact with these set questions. Is that pretty much bang on the mark as to how you go about character building?
Well, yes. Questions that asking yourself when you come to look at a character are not what are their strengths are, what are their weaknesses, what are their flaws. One of the ways I looked at it is by asking themselves the difference between, on that template I showed you, one of the questions was, how do they see themselves? And the next question, how do others see them? So a character could see themselves as an upright guardian of moral law, the last great bastion against moral evil. And then the next question is, how do others see them? As a complete arsehole. So really contrast between their perspective and others' perspectives.
Yeah, so he thinks he's doing the right thing, blah 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 blah, and everyone's like, this guy's just up himself. Like, he's sure, maybe he gets the job done, but he's just a douche about it.
Me asking, saying, how can I make this character and how can I make that character? I'm always telling them, trying to find a relatable flaw about them. For example, someone once contacted me wanting to make a squire in a medieval setting, fantasy genre, and he wanted him to be brave and bold and the best with the sword and knocking trained knights off horseback as a squire. I said to him, you have to reverse him. This guy is a squire. He should not be knocking trained knights off horses. They should be beating him consistently. And then, throughout the pace of the story, watch him grow in skill and strength until by the end he has become the character who can knock trained knights off a horse. It's the journey of the character.
So in a lot of instances, you would almost say the character that you want the character that you want it to be is the end goal of the narrative. If you want with the squire, if you want him to be this badass who's doing knocking other knights off and blah 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 blah, then that's your narrative in itself.
Exactly, yeah. There's a quote in the White Dwarf article that I think sums everything you need to know about writing, and it was simply this: change is the engine of a story. And I think that is absolutely the heart and soul of any great story. There has to be. If your character comes out the same as when they began, nothing very interesting has happened in your story.
Then nothing happened.
Exactly.
Yeah. All to in that instance though, that's great for your own characters. But I noticed, so in the Amber Vipers, you've put a very light touch of Guilliman in the story. How do you go about writing characters that are big names? So obviously they're not your characters. They're not, and when people read them, they're going to have very set expectations of how they behave, or how they are. So what sort of tricks do you use, or processes do you use to write in characters that are your big name brands? Guilliman, Asur, what's that elder called? Asuraman, or if you're going to write Shadow Sun, someone who everybody knows. How do you go about writing that?
I'd say bringing an established character is a lot harder than making your own, because there are certain expectations. One hard and fast I have in my writing is that no fanfic character should be able to beat a named special character. For example, in one of my stories, someone punched Guilliman, and in response, Guilliman beat him into a coma. Outclassed. It was just pathetically outclassed by Guilliman. And I feel when it comes to Primarchs, that's how it should be. Another trick I used with the Amber Vipers was
100%.
I wanted the Amber Vipers to be working under his direction, but it was still their story. It wasn't Guilliman's story. So though he was present, all his scenes were written as flashbacks. So he was there, but it didn't become his story.
Yeah, he wasn't active in the present, so to speak. He was influencing other characters' actions.
And just for those obviously who haven't read it, the way that I have read the part where, because I think that's where the Amber Viper's tale was on pause at that point, when Guilliman touched, when they sort of get away with the Serpent's Rex, and Guilliman rocks up and he's like, all you boys come, report to my office right now, you're in deep shit. And I think that's sort of where I stopped reading the narrative. I know because the rest, the next part wasn't written yet. But I did get to see the start of how you had written in Guilliman, and I thought it was really, really clever, because it doesn't break anything of the current narrative, but it gives a super, super cool way to have the Amber Vipers all of a sudden go from just nobodies in the galaxy to actually having a much more significant role. And yeah, it definitely can be done, and I think the way you did it was really good. But yeah, for people in general, it's like you said, it's probably one of the harder things to do, right?
I didn't take their obscurity as a flaw, but as a strength. So the reason Guilliman had any interest in them at all was because they were nobodies. What they bring for him is a concept of plausible deniability. So he can give them any mission he wants, because nobody would ever suspect that they're working for him. So they can go off and kill Imperial governors and steal supplies and divert and kidnap and blackmail, do all the things Space Marines are not supposed to be doing, and all the while they get the blame and Guilliman gets to keep his hands clean. And something I'm going to explore in future stories is
yeah, I was trying to make those statements without popping too many spoilers, but basically yeah, how it breaks down is he uses them like there is scapegoats. He goes, I need you to go do something that is not quite Codex compliant, which is, and he sends them, which is, it ties in well with the current law, because Guilliman's sort of, he's looking at the Codex in the modern era, and he is sort of, there are instances of him sort of going, well, it's more like a guideline than an actual rule. You didn't and him making changes to sizes of chapters and whatever. That happens, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like he starts. I'm trying to think of the reference now where he sort of goes, okay, we need more. It's with the Grey Shields, isn't it?
More or less.
Well, he's basically rewriting the Codex.
And he starts going, well, we need more.
He's rewriting the new Codex Imperialis to replace his old Codex.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because he's like, I left you with this book, and you obviously can't read, so we'll do it again. Well, that pretty much sums up everything that I had. Dalton, do you have anything else you would like to touch on?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, it's a very, very basic questions, probably done to death. But if there are people listening that are like, maybe they enjoy the lore and enjoy making their own characters with their models or anything like that, is there any advice you'd give specifically to go? Here's is there anything that's worth them looking? Is there anything that's worth looking into if they want to start taking that any further?
Well, I think the place to start writing is to ask yourself what you really love is. If you want to write a great story, then write the story you want to read. And there's plenty of scope in the 40k universe for anything you can imagine. The galaxy is so vast that you could have any combination of any characters and armies. And there's room for them. There's plenty of room for anything to happen in the 40k universe. So just let your imagination run wild and see what interests you and follow it.
And is that basically the same as painting? It sort of sounds like it's the same as painting. It's like if you just start, it will happen, sort of thing. Like if I just pick up a paintbrush and start painting, all of a sudden 2 hours later, I've sort of halfway through a model or whatever. Is it the sort of same for writing? Like, just put words on paper and it's not the end. Just get started. You can retcon it 500 times, 600 times, and just go. Is that what you're sort of leaning into?
Taking your passion and running with it. The best advice I could give to someone who's struggling to put together a story would be, say, think about where you want to start, think about where you want to end, and take us from the beginning to the end in a story. So, like you said, it's just a matter of just having a go.
Yeah. So you generally write, or you always start with your endings then? Like, is that what you go, I want the story to end here, and then you work backwards? Or do you go into it with with a setting in mind, and then the ending develops as you write?
I think I'm very much a plotter as a writer. There's two kinds of writers, gardeners and plotters, and I'm very much a plotter, so I have an idea of where the story is going as I'm writing it. Some things will change, some details might not work the way I planned, something might occur halfway through, but I have an idea of where the goal is that I'm aiming for.
Yeah, and then you work. So that's the theory of the potter, is that they work backwards from a goal.
Generally, yes.
And then would a gardener be someone who's going the other way? They just sort of started and they'll sort out the end when they get there.
Yes, I'd say it's the difference between Tolkien and J.R.R. Martin. Tolkien was a plotter. J.R.R. Martin is a gardener. You can see that in their writing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I haven't read J.R.R. Martin's stuff. I couldn't even watch the TV show.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the classic thing as to why George R. R. Martin hasn't finished the last book, right? It's because it's taking so long to wrap everything up and to figure out where it all goes.
Yeah, because he hasn't worked it out yet. I see. I mean, I couldn't imagine writing like that, or like doing things like that. Having any task without an end. It'd be like, if you have a 2,000 point army and you've got to paint it for an event, that's the goal. But like, I think I would always need a goal for my painting or work or whatever. Definitely definitely a goal-oriented person.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I mean, yeah. If that wraps it up, I guess we're about to hit the hour mark, so I'll sort of wrap things up there.
Yeah.
Is there any final thoughts you'd like to add, Matt?
Well, just one little thought I'd like to share is the difference between grim dark, such as we have in 40k, and noble bright, which is more Tolkien-esque fantasy. And in the noble bright universe, you generally find that the heroes are good, leaders are wise, there's usually a destiny and a big reward at the end. I find grimdark is a universe where the are awful, the good guys aren't much better, leaders they're just trapped in a universe where there's no moral guideline. I'd say grimdark is a universe where your characters have to figure out what's right for themselves as they go along, and there's no absolute moral guidance or destiny to unfold.
Yeah, I like
there may
that.
not be an
I
easy
think
answer.
that's a good end note, because we always talk about the grim dark, blah blah blah. But yeah, you're right. The bad guys are bad, well, the bad guys are horrendous, and the good guys are bad. And it's if you're trying to keep in that thing, that's a really good way to think about it.
Well, thank you very much, Matt, for coming on and making it available.
Thank you for staying up late and putting up with my inability to read time. It's been awesome to have you. I've been wanting to do this for a while because I really personally enjoy your stuff and would love to see it get out there more.
We'll have links down in the description to the ones we mentioned earlier, and then to a bunch of your work. So if you're listening to that and you enjoyed the sound of that and you want to check it out, it's all down there. Go on, check it out, show them some love. It's really great.
Okay. Thank you. I've enjoyed this.
All right.
But yeah, thank you for coming on. Fantastic. It was great to have you. Great to chat. Thank you, Jake, as well for coming on. Thank you all for listening. Make sure to leave a like, rating, all the usual stuff. You guys know the drill by now.
All the algorithm things.
Yeah. Feed the algorithm. Thank you guys for listening. We'll catch you guys next time.
See you later.